this morning as we find ourselves at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew's gospel account, we still find these words, and its overall purpose is to demonstrate the imperative to follow Christ's commands, the requirement to keep his words, and the impact they have on our life as believers, the impact to act and not just hear, to do and not just be aware. If you will join me in your copy of God's Word, we'll read Matthew chapter 7, beginning verse 21 through the end of the chapter. So Matthew chapter 7, beginning in verse 21 reads, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do mighty works in your name?' And then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness.' Everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who builds his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. And when Jesus finished saying these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority, and not as their scribes." These words of power and of majesty that Christ gives us, and we see from the very beginning how our words matter and what impact they have. In verse 21, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven." This is a critical piece of understanding that it's more than just a vocalization of who Jesus is. It is more than simply saying, "Jesus, you are Lord." It is an action, it is a lifestyle that is required there, far beyond what words can deliver. No vivid outward expression of religion can lift us from the sinfulness that we're in. Will never provide us with salvation. And this is the picture that he begins to depict here among these things. It does not mean for certain that we would not proclaim his name and his holiness. That is far from the case. But it does mean that that profession is far more than words can deliver. We cannot expect to inherit the kingdom of heaven with shallow connotations and confessions of just who Jesus is. When our actions don't match with our words, it is the height of hypocrisy. But it goes on with the latter part of this. The one who does inherit, the one who is going to be right with in standing with God, is the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Well, what is God's will? But that we would believe in Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior, that we would repent of our sinfulness, that we would live lives of holiness in keeping with the cross, that we would love God with everything and our neighbor as ourself. That is the will of the Father, and this is what he describes here. Not those who would simply cry out, "Lord, Lord," but those who would act on those words. Those who truly put it into a genuine faith. Our lives must reflect what we mean is we're going to call him Lord. The Lord, the term there, if we look at that, simply means someone who is in charge, someone who has authority or power over. And if I'm to call Jesus Lord in my life, that means he exercises that authority over me. So it's not okay to call him Lord, but then act as if he's not. It's not okay to call him Lord and then pretend that it doesn't matter. Lord is a name that's very representative of who he is and what he's intended to be in our lives as we call upon him, but our lives must reflect that. It's much more than just saying it. It is showing it and demonstrating it day by day in the things that we do and how we live our lives. If we continue on in verse 22, "On that day many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do mighty works in your name on that day. Folks, there is a day that will come. It is a day of judgment where we will stand before a holy God and our lives become transparent before him and laid out forever for him to see what we're about and who we truly are. That will be a very critical day and a day of blessing for some of us and a day of dread for many, many others who face our Creator, who will also be our judge. And those who face this rejection, as in the first verse, didn't we say, Lord, Lord, didn't we call you God? There's an attempt here to substitute genuine faith with acts of doing things. God, okay, maybe I didn't live my life the way I should have. Maybe I didn't follow you. Maybe I just, with words, I came out and I said what was right, and my religion looked really good, and I sat in church every Sunday, and I did all the things that looked like they were supposed to. But my life wasn't there. I get that. But let's bargain for a minute. Perhaps the things that I did, maybe they'll substitute in the hereafter for genuine faith, for living a life truly devoted to you. Didn't we prophesy in your name? Didn't I tell other people about you? Didn't I proclaim your good news? Didn't I do all those wonderful things? Well, you have only to look up a few verses to verse 15 from last week where he says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. As our world is today, Jesus' world was filled with false prophets. Those who, despite the claims they made, despite the words that they expressed, even sermons that they would give, their motivation, their lives did not reflect who God was. Their self-satisfying sermons, their desires to grow themselves, particularly financially, because of what they were doing and what they were saying, did not bring them an inch closer to God than what they truly were. And then he goes on, the second, did we not cast out demons in your name? Well, that sounds pretty spectacular. We cast out demons in your name. Well, if you'll remember that Judas was among the original 12. He was a part of that circle that Jesus had among him. And Judas was given power to cast out demons. But we know Judas's fate. Despite everything that he experienced, everything that he had seen, he was so disillusioned by the fact that Jesus wasn't going to become this earthly king and bring him to power that he fell away. And we know Judas never had part of Jesus and what he was doing. Lastly, he says, okay, in my works, he says, I did mighty works in your name. I performed miracles and I did all these wonderful things and I helped people and all these kinds of things. Well, we also know that when Moses stood before Pharaoh and God performed miracles through Moses, and then the Egyptian magicians, in the same sense, in their trickery, performed the same miracles. They certainly had no part of salvation. It is far beyond any type of works that we do that would bring us or lift us from the sinfulness that we're in and bring us to the place of eternity in heaven. It is a reversal of things. We have this attempt in wanting to try to earn this. And God, when have I done enough that I would actually earn a place in heaven? When will you be pleased with me enough that you would let me in? And that is not the price of admission at all. We have it backwards. First, we come into salvation. This is a work of God. Through the act of Jesus Christ, by grace through faith alone, in Jesus Christ alone, to the glory of God alone. Then from that, there's an outflow. From there, then we begin to look at, what will I do? I will prophesy in your name. I will do mighty works in your name. I will go to the homeless. I will go to the orphans. I will go to those in need, and I will prophesy to people and tell them who you truly are, but not the other way around. We can never substitute works for genuine faith. And so we stood before God face to face on that day. Let it not be in vain that we have lived these lives and what he has called us to be. We have Isaiah 64:6. I want to read that to you. We have all become like one who is unclean. All of our righteous deeds are like a polluted garment. We fade like a leaf, and our iniquities like the wind take us away. On my very best day, the most wonderful thing I could possibly do for all of humanity, I can make a wonderful impact on the world. Outside of God's realm, outside of his hand, it is about as worthless as a dirty, tattered wash rag. It is useless, and it will get me no closer to heaven than what I am right now. Outside of God, doing those works is not a result of our salvation, but doing it on our own, because what does it do? It puts the attention on me. My motivation is satisfying my ego, my pride, but when I do them through God, then God gets the glory. And this is what Jesus is referencing and bringing up here for this point. I want to continue on as he look at verse 23. And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. These will be faithful words for far too many. For far too many. Who will stand before a holy God on a day and says, I don't even know who you are. You spent a lifetime rejecting me and denying me and living for yourself. And you stand before me now and ask, Lord, Lord, didn't I do these wonderful things for you? And he will far from there depart from us. I'm going to flip over to chapter 10 in the same gospel in Matthew, verses 32 and 33. So everyone who acknowledges me before men, I will also acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I will also deny before my Father who is in heaven. That is what denial looks like, and that is what denial results in. If we spend a lifetime, despite what we might say, despite how we might act, but the truth of it is our genuine faith is lacking. And we stand before a holy God and we have denied him before men. Denied him in the workplace, denied him in the home, denied him in the market. And then ask him to accept us in the midst of all that. It again is a height of hypocrisy. Then he turns to lawlessness. This idea of lawlessness. This lawlessness is clear and deliberate sin. This is what he's referring to. It is certainly not the two greatest commandments of love God with everything and love your neighbor yourself. It is the heights of rebellion. It is an open and wanton desire for the things of this world, the sinful things of this world. It is a clenched fist shaking at God saying, I will not do what you want. It is lawlessness. And is what he refers to here and what he gives us in this truth about what Christ is saying and what he is trying to convey to us. I think John's words put it very well. I'm going to just read to you from 1 John chapter 3, the first 10 verses. See what kind of love the Father has given to us, that we should be called the children of God, and so we are. The reason why the world does not know us is that it did not know him. Beloved, we are God's children, and that what we will be has not yet appeared. But we know what he has appeared. We shall be like him. Because we shall see him as he is, and everyone thus hopes in him, purifies himself as he is pure. And he goes on. Everyone who makes a practice of sinning also practices lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness. You know that he appeared in order to take away sins, and in him there is no sin. No one who abides in him keeps on sinning. No one who keeps on sinning has either seen him or known him. Little children, let no one deceive you. Whoever practices righteousness is righteous, as he is righteous. Whoever makes a practice of sinning is of the devil. For the devil has been sinning from the beginning. The reason the Son of God appeared was to destroy the works of the devil, that no one born of God makes a practice of sinning. For God's seed abides in him, and he cannot keep on sinning because he has been born of God. By this it is evident who are the children of God and who are the children of the devil. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of God, nor is the one who does not love his brother. He makes a clear distinction here. He doesn't mince words whatsoever. If we continue in sinfulness, if we continue in this habitual, perpetual sin, we are not of God. And John doesn't hold anything back from that. Am I going to struggle in this body? Yes, I am, because it's a fleshly body and it wants what it wants. But my desire is for God. And when sin is exposed to me and I become aware of it and become convicted of it, then it's put away. But those who would continue on in sin upon sin and reacting as the world wants us to react, We have no part in God. It is not our righteousness. It is a self-satisfying lifestyle that has nothing to do with God. He doesn't make any room for any gray areas or any riding the fence. He says you're with Christ or you're without Christ. And our words would bear that out, but certainly our lives would bear that out as well, to say exactly who he is. So what John is representing here, the scene that he paints for us here, is what's often referred to as practical atheism. And that seems like a strange term. Atheism, surely in its purest form, is to deny God even exists, despite the overwhelming evidence, despite everything that we have seen and that we know, to deny God exists. Practical atheism is in the sense that we might acknowledge that God exists, but our lives deny him. Everything that we've said and done, everything that we might profess, and even sitting in a pew on a Sunday morning. But if someone looks at my life and looks for evidence in my life that God is real, it doesn't exist. It is a practical atheism. That by my actions seems to show that there is no God. It is not a false faith. It is a fake faith. It is a mask that hides the unbeliever in a cloak of religion. As we look at verse 24, everyone that hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. This is a wonderful analogy, or even a parable, if you want, that we're all probably very familiar with, these words that he has given us and what he says. And he reinforces this tenet that his words matter, that we put them into action, that we don't just know them, but that we do them. It's far more than mental assent. But it is a practical means of living a life worthy of the cross. His inference is related to wisdom and building here. Something I think that, if nothing else, has at least some common sense, even if you've never built. It would have been well known to the people of his time, and is very well known to us. There are some things that you must be very sure of, that you starting with a solid foundation is the most critical to success in any structure that you are going to put up. The foundation is the first piece, and it is the most vital piece if it is going to be sustained. It reminded me as I looked at these words of the town that I grew up in. The soil there had a real high clay content to it. And so if you've ever dealt with that soil before, you know it tends to shift a lot, and it tends to move and contract and expand, and it was very bad for foundations. In fact, in this town, it was pretty much just known. If you have a house there, it's going to have some foundation issues. It's going to shift. There's going to be cracks in the wall. It is just part of the territory. It's just the way it is. It wasn't a matter of whether it had it, it's just how bad were the foundation conditions in this town. The town that Melissa and I had lived in before we moved here was completely different. It was a stark contrast. There you would dig down a few inches and you would hit white rock. Huge, massive beds of white rock, solid all the way through. In fact, to build a house, most often they would have to scrape away and trench through white rock to put down the plumbing and even pour the foundation upon it. Houses there never moved. They were solid. They didn't shift. You didn't see cracks in the walls. It just didn't happen. And there's the difference that he's really getting at here. What are you really building upon? What is your life staked upon? What is your foundation that you're using? Is it the shifting sand? Is it clay? Is it something solid and something secure that we would hold on to? This is an idea. We all have a house to build. This house is our hope of heaven. Rather than build a settlement here on this earth and tied to the things of this world, we would take our treasure and we would put it somewhere permanent, somewhere lasting, somewhere that won't let us down and won't go away. In verse 25, and the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. Just as in a house, it's going to face storms, it's going to face torrents, it'll face winds and all kinds of adversity against it. A good house built on a solid foundation will withstand. We've all seen these things. And that is the point behind it. And just as these houses, our lives are the same way. In our lives, we face trials, we face struggles, we face persecutions, and the hard days are going to come. Monday morning is going to come, or the boss is going to be a problem, or issues at home, or finances are falling apart, or whatever it is. But that's all fine if my life is built upon a solid foundation. These things can swirl all around me. They can go crazy, and the world can just go nuts. But if I have the assurance that Christ is holding me, then even in the midst of the worst storm, I can have peace. I can have assurance. I can have rest when everything else seems to be falling apart. And this, to me, is exactly what he is getting at. The rock that he's building on here is Christ himself. He's the only thing that is certain. He's the only thing that is sure. He's the only thing that is lasting. Not the things of this world. Not money, not homes and cars and careers. Christ alone will endure to the end. The rest of it will let us down. He is immovable and will hold firm to us. He is our anchor for our soul, sure and steadfast to all eternity. We can count on him. Now on the other side, verse 26. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. It makes this contrast of someone who would build a house on sand, of being foolish. And certainly we would agree, who would build a house upon sand? Something that is constantly shifting or being washed away. But this is exactly what he's saying, is if we hear his words and we don't apply them to our lives, if we don't live according to what he has called us to be, we are no different. That we have built a house upon shifting sands with a horrible foundation that at some point is going to give out. At some point will fall away from us. If we simply look back to a few weeks ago to chapter 6, verses 19 through 20. Do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourself treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And again, we have to ask the question, where is your treasure? Do we value things of this world more than we value Christ? Have we lifted ourselves up and placed our lives upon shifting sand? Things are going to crumble and fall, or have we lifted ourselves up and put ourselves in Christ and by his power on his rock, that we would live there? We must set our sights on what's most important and what's lasting. There is a kind of a homemade test for finding a real diamond. You can take a real diamond and you can take a fake diamond and you can put them in a glass of water. And interesting to think about it, the fake ones, because of the difference in their refractive indexes, the fake one will become more transparent. It will look very washed out and very ghost-like. And it becomes pretty obvious between the real one and the fake one. And that's what we have here. When we look upon these things, when we take the things of Christ and the sure things and the steadfast things and the solid things of Christ, and we put them next to the things of this world, as the song says, they become strangely dim. It becomes obvious how fleeting they are and how fanciful they are and how cheap and degrading they are. But it is the truth of what we see there in these things. Proverbs 1:7 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. When we come under Christ, when we truly submit ourselves to him, that is when we truly understand. When we completely comprehend who he is and what God has for us. But we're foolish when we deny him and the things that he says to us and the things that he has warned us about. It is folly to the greatest degree. So in most, when we see in verse 26, this man who has built his house on this shifting sand, when he most needs it, when the storms come, when the rains hit, when the wind is swirling all around him, and he needs shelter the most, that's when it fails him. That's when it truly falls apart for him. when we most needed shelter, some kind of protection. And that's what the world offers us. If you will simply buy this, you'll be happier. If you'll simply go here, your life will be better. If you'll be a part of this organization or this club, then everything's going to be great. But it always lets us down. They make lofty promises. And they're very convincing in the things that they had to say, but they don't last. They always fall short. And this is what Jesus is trying to get across to us. In verse 27, the rain fell, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall. When we have taken our dreams and our aspirations and our desires and we have tacked them to these lofty promises, and they've been lifted up and we've been told we're going to be happier, but when they fail, this crash is tremendous. The letdown is heartbreaking. You see lives that are ruined because they've been anchored in something that was already sinking. It's an incredible thing. When we consider sands, one of the things that's kind of amazing to me, and I think they do a spectacular job, is these sand sculpture competitions. They're pretty amazing. They do some pretty incredible work. In fact, as I understand, the biggest one ever made in a competition was 18 foot tall. And the guy who made it was actually only 5 foot tall. He had to use a bunch of ladders and such to be able to get to even the top of it to do this. But as I understand, the largest one that was ever made, the largest sand sculptures ever put together, was almost 17 miles long. It was put together by 11,000 people. They actually brought in specialized sculptures to put this thing together. It was actually just an amazing thing. I mean, to see something so large and so grand and so spectacular. Where are these sculptures today? Of course, they're gone. A sand sculpture will never last. It was never meant to last. It might look good for a while. It might actually be rather appealing. Create a beautiful picture or an amazing horizon or a portrait, but they don't last. They're not intended to. We, in the same sense, have to be careful not to attach our lives to something that was never meant to last. Despite all the time and effort and endurance required to put these sand sculptures together, they won't remain. And so it is with things of this world. The last two verses 28 and 29, and when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teachings. For he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. This is the response. The crowds that listened to these words, we've read these last few chapters, their response is amazement. This is incredible. He comes and he talks to us as one with authority. He spoke as a judge giving his charge. Not like our scribes and the Pharisees who, they always taught us some of the same things, but they talked as ones who didn't have authority. In fact, they gave us these words, but almost they didn't seem to believe them. But he comes with such power. There's something different here about him. These scribes and Pharisees had this propped up religion. They give hollow words, shallow meanings, and they laid burdens upon the people. But this is not what they were hearing here. They were hearing the truth in Jesus Christ. They were hearing God's own Son as he taught. His lessons became laws. His commands are his words, and his identity is made sure that he is the Son of God. And all this becomes very clear as we look at these things. And too often I fear we can be guilty of hearing the words but choosing to ignore them. Again, in a sense of practical atheism, of understanding the truth but then refusing to live by it. When we do, we live in danger of crying out, Lord, Lord, and then hearing those words, I don't even know you. May our lives this morning be in him. May we live life-changing lifestyles because we have been transformed from the inside out. May we know him more and more. May we not trust in temporary things, but may we be solid in the rock of Jesus Christ and who he is. This morning I would ask you, Have you attempted to substitute genuine faith with actions? Have you lived a life, and despite the words of your mouth, do we too often, lives don't reflect that? Are your hopes and your dreams and your faith this morning built upon shifting sand? The things of this world that just won't last and it won't matter in a very short time? Or are you built upon the rock? That is the promise. That if we will call upon him, if we will give him our lives, if we will trust him with everything and build upon him, that he will see us through. He is steadfast and true. He is sure. And then we have all eternity to revel in his glory and what he has done in our lives. So in the moment as we come to a time of decision, I want you to ponder those things, those confessions, and what God is doing this morning in your life. Is it time for a change? Is it time to acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord and build upon the rock and who he truly is?